Hey everybody. So what we're going to do is look at some similarities and differences between Houdini and Max. Even though they're vastly different pieces of software, when you really dig into them, the starting place is actually quite similar because they are both node-based multimedia environments. They're both really deep, rich tools. Max has an emphasis on real-time interactive content, whereas Houdini has an emphasis on modeling visual effects and rendering high-definition images for film and television. We're not going to be using all of those aspects of Houdini. We're going to be focusing on the modeling aspect of Houdini and then exporting objects that we model in Houdini into the more interactive real-time rendering environment of Max. To get started with, we're going to see a lot of similarities. In Max, we have a world that has a window. When we have a handle, we can look at objects in our world from different angles, and we can manipulate those objects with attrui. In Houdini, we can create a new object in our world by clicking into the Objects window and hitting the Tab key. That calls up a menu, and just like in Max, we can begin to type, and Houdini will suggest different objects for us. In this case, we can create a box. This gray ghost is the box. I haven't clicked it down into the Objects window yet, but when I do, it creates a box in my world. I can also create the box by right-clicking, which gives me the same menu. And clicking it down, I can also take many objects from the toolbar and just drag them into the Objects window. And so we see this window is the equivalent of our world, and it already has the equivalent of a handle, so we can manipulate our view of the objects and use the scroll to zoom in and out on the object. I can create multiple objects in my world. I'll create a sphere, and the blue marker on each object tells me which object is going to be rendered. For right now, you definitely do want to drag the sphere down from the toolbar because the sphere that's created from the tab menu is slightly different. So make sure that you create your sphere from the toolbar and create your box from the toolbar for right now also, because there is a slight difference and it'll be important for what we're doing in this tutorial. So you can see when I click on the box, I get a bunch of attributes in this inspector that are relevant to the box. And when I click on the sphere, I get the attributes for the sphere. So these are just like the attrui, but the way you interact with them is a little bit different. Position is known as translate. And when I click it with the middle mouse button, which is also the scroll wheel, and I could select the magnitude of change I want. I can change by integers, tenths, hundredths, thousandths, etc. So if I want to move this sphere to the right by hundredths of a meter, I can click on the 0.1 and then I drag to the right. And you see the sphere is now moving to the right. And also I can type in the numbers as well. And if I want to change all three values at the same time proportionally, I can actually click on the word and adjust all three values at the same time. If I want to reset my view, I hit H, but notice that that gives us a different view than the home view in Max. When I click Reset in Max, it brings me to a view that's on the Z-axis, whereas when I hit H or Home in Houdini, it takes me to a position that's above and diagonal to the objects. So in order to make this home key match Max, just so there's a little bit easier familiarity between the two programs, you're going to want to go to this PERSP menu and set the home to the Z axis. And now when you hit H, it's going to take you to a view of the objects That's the same as when you hit reset in Max. It's quite nice to be able to use the middle mouse wheel to zoom in and out. So, this is not where the similarity between Max and Houdini ends, but we're about to see one of the significant differences between Max and Houdini. In Max, there's nothing inside my jit.gl.gridshape. If I double-click it, nothing happens. Now, there's a lot of objects in Max. If I double-click them, I will see inside of them. For instance, the patcher object. If I take this and edit, encapsulate, and I call it P cube, this patcher has something inside of it. What's inside of it? When I double-click it, this construction that I just encapsulated is inside of it. In Houdini, there's always something inside a geometry node. So let's get rid of this box. I'm going to center this sphere, translate it back to 0, 0, 0, scale it back to 1, 1, 1, home it, and I'm going to call it planet. Okay? And inside of planet, when I double click it, there's a sphere inside. So what is this? Well, this is the actual description of the geometry. If we look up here, it says primitive type polygon mesh, connectivity quadrilaterals, and then it gives us radius, center, rotate, scale. And then this, rows and columns, is the equivalent of the dim attribute in Max. I'll change this to a sphere. We saw in the Max tutorial that this coarse edge on the sphere is caused by a low dimensionality, but if we took it up to a dimensionality of 50 by 50, we'd get a much smoother edge on our sphere. So that's the same thing here. Rows and columns is the same as dim, and in Houdini it's actually a little bit easier to see. If we go up to 50 by 50, right, that's why in Max it's a smoother sphere, because it's broken up into many more quadrilaterals. So this is the actual description of the geometry. If I want to get back to my main level, I can hit the back button, double click to dive in. I can also hit the letter U for up, which takes me up. This higher level is where I can have multiple render flags, because I can have multiple objects here. They can be in different places, and I can render one of them, the other one, or none. But when I dive in to my planet, now I only get one render flag. There's only one output of this node. So let's make a Boolean like we saw. I'll bring in a torus. Create a Boolean. I'll put the sphere and the torus into the Boolean, and now I'm still rendering the sphere. If I put the flag here, I'm rendering the Boolean. Now I'm seeing the output of the Boolean operation. So there's only one render flag when I'm inside a geometry. I'm either seeing the torus, the sphere, or the intersection of the torus and the sphere. And if I look up here in my inspector, the reason I'm seeing an intersection is because my operation is intersect. I can change my operation to subtract, and now we're seeing the more familiar Boolean from the previous video where the torus has been subtracted from the sphere. But there's multiple operations you can do. You can do the union, which combines them. You can do the intersection of them, which is the shape where they're overlapping. You can subtract them. And so this actually isn't a planet, this is more like an apple core. All right, so I have the apple core with the sphere and the torus inside of it. And then if I want to export this object so that I can use it in Max, and I'm going to flip this window up to here so this is easier to see. Right click and say Save Geometry. All right, and it's going to ask me to name the output file. You're going to want to name it Apple Core or whatever .obj, and you have to put the .obj because that's the file format that Max is going to understand. And then here you decide where you're going to save it. And Houdini has its own file dialog, which is a little bit challenging to get around. Once you have the folder that you want to save stuff into, it's a good idea to make a favorite out of it. So you see I have a bunch of favorites here on the side. So I'm going to save my applecore.obj into my class folder. And I hit accept. And now in Max, if I'm working in a project, I can take the file I just created, add it to my project, consolidate my project, and that will create a copy of my object inside my project folder. And if you're not using projects, you can simply drag the OBJ file into the folder where your MaxPat also is, and then you can drag that right into your Max Patcher. And there's the object we created in Houdini, now existing as a model file in Max.